Well, we have discussed all of the 287 principles or provisions of the Constitution. Now I want us to turn to page 765 and talk for a few minutes about the final remarks that Dr. Skousen has made concerning what we've just done. I hope that you, as we have been through these provisions, have seen where the founders are almost pulling in their desire to establish for the first time in the history of this world a system that will work and that will last and that will provide freedom. Have you not noticed that in their quotes that we have read, in their pleadings, trying to help us to understand these provisions? I hope you've noticed that. This chapter is entitled Striving for a Higher Level of Civilization. And that's really what the founders were trying to do, to lift the whole world, if it were possible, from what? From what level? We've talked about this. From the level that you always find under tyranny or dictatorship, from a level of misery, lift them up to a higher level. What the founders were really trying to do is reach the 8th step. And you say, what is the 8th step? Step 1 was when the Anglo-Saxons came into Britain. What year was that? 450 AD. Established in Britain. Changed the name to Yingling Land, you remember that? Established in Britain. A marvelous system of government, which lasted until what fateful year? 1066, which is step 2, when ruler's law took over. And basically that was the problem between the Saxons and the Normans, and the Saxon people lost a great amount of their rights and liberty. Now you might say, why is that a step up? Because that's kind of what this little chart looks like, right? It's a step up. Is ruler's law a step up? Well, not really, but it gives us an example. It gives us a point of reference of what will happen, what can happen when people lose out. Has it been instructive for us? Yes, because look at number 3. What was the next step? The people trying to regain their rights again. You remember that? And in 1215 they took a big chart and wrote upon it. What'd they call it? Magna Carta. That's step 3. In step 4 is when parliamentary power began to evolve. When the people said, I think we need to send some of our best people up to be with the king. That's Parliament. Our Congress grew out of that concept. Okay? Don't trust the king totally. He'll make mistakes and he won't remember our rights. So we need to send some people up there who represent us. See that concept? That's step 4. Step 5 became parliamentary supremacy. What does that mean? That means that Parliament became too powerful. It was supreme. The rights of the people were not supreme. Parliament was supreme. But that provided a tremendous point of reference for the founders in what they did in the Constitution. Look at the next step. Okay, if we don't want Parliament to be supreme, how about the states becoming supreme? And that's happened. When did that happen? In the Articles of Confederation. That was step 6. And the founders said, we don't want to do that either. That doesn't work. That has some real disadvantages. And so they constructed a system wherein Parliament was not supreme, wherein the states were not supreme, but where who was supreme? The people were supreme. And the people adopted a written law of supremacy, which we call the what? The Constitution. And that is step 7. Now what is all this for? Is it just for an experiment to see if it's any good? Is it just an experiment? Is it just something that somebody thought, well, I think we'll do it this way? What was the purpose of writing this Constitution? You remember John Adams? When he said how he envisions the whole world eventually coming under constitutional principles. And you read the writings of the founders, you don't get a vision of America just within America itself. This thing is supposed to be a means of accomplishing a worldwide goal of eventually freeing the whole world from tyranny, slavery, and oppression, which, if we were to reach that level, would be step 8. Do you see that? Where we would enjoy worldwide freedom, prosperity, and peace. And as one founder said, for 1,000 years. Isn't that an amazing vision of the founders? Now, what do you have to say about us on step 7? What's your assessment of us being on step 7? Are we ready to move to step 8? We're not. We're about ready to fall off of step 7. After all this history, after all this experience, we're about ready to blow it. Except we do what? We begin to learn again about step 7, which is what we've done. Start spreading the word that, hey, there really is a better way. Get back anchored on step 7 so we can move on to step 8. That is the vision of the founders for America. And it's my conviction that that vision is yet to be fulfilled, but that it will be fulfilled. And who will be the ones to help it be fulfilled? You young people. Well, step 8 then is worldwide freedom, prosperity, and peace. Now, how are we going to do that? We've already kind of hinted that. How are we going to make it possible for the whole world, if they want to enjoy this great blessing? You got to provide a framework, right? Somebody has got to put down in writing and at least prove in one country that it's possible. Does it happen? Yes. The Constitution provides the framework. And if America doesn't blow it, we're going to prove that it works. We have proven that it works by many means, haven't we, already? This is just one example of what freedom does in one aspect of our lives. And this is the miracle of American food production. Consider, for example, the effort to produce an adequate supply of food. Let me ask you this. Can you teach people about freedom if they're starving to death?
No.
You can't. That's the first need you have to fulfill. So this is a very basic a need of people to help them have enough food. Well, how are you going to do it? The American farmer has taken advantage of technology, machinery, fossil fuels, fertilizers, pesticides, and nutritional feed additives for dairy and meat production. Until today, each American farmer is able to feed his own family and some 78 other people in the United States and around the world. Did you know that in farming, generally, the whole world basically was agricultural, and you produced what you ate, maybe for a little bit more, but basically that's what people still in most of the world can produce, just what they and their family hopefully can eat. Sometimes not even that. But an American farmer produces what he needs and his family plus 78 other people. That's amazing. Well, let's go on. To produce this much food in 1918, before the widespread use of tractors, would have required around 61 million horses and mules. You imagine that? To feed this many work animals today would require about 180 million acres of cropland, almost half of the American cropland now in cultivation. What's he saying here? If we hadn't had technology, we would have had to have 61 million horses, and just to feed those horses would have taken half of the American cropland. Do you ever think of that? But luckily, the transformation from animal and human power to machinery, that great industrial revolution, made it possible to not to have to devote half of the American agriculture to feeding horses. Anyway, that's the miracle. Now, question is, What happens when you don't have freedom and you don't have industrial revolutions? And the answer is, when freedom fails, people starve. Famine always follows. And the example in your book is the example of Ethiopia. Some of you remember what happened in Ethiopia. Ethiopia, by the way, where is that?
It's in Africa.
It's in Africa, okay. Over by Somalia. Did you know that Ethiopia used to be the breadbasket of northern Africa? What do we mean by breadbasket?
Yeah, a lot of food.
They produce a lot. This is under Haile Selassie, who was the leader of Ethiopia when I was your age and for many years. And they had so much production that they were able to export and feed other countries in North Africa. Incredible production machine. And Haile Selassie, the emperor there, encouraged education and technology and allowed his people to have a certain degree of freedom, which really was an example to all of North Africa. Then something happened. He was in the process of doing this, but there were people who came along and said, "Don't you want it faster? Don't you want it tomorrow? Why go through all this education? Why go through all this time-consuming building? Why not just have it right now?" And there came into that country false teachers and false prophets of prosperity, trying to say, "We have a better idea." And so, it gave the people false hopes. I don't know, does that happen today? Mm-hmm. Where you want immediate possession of the things that make life comfortable. Heck with getting an education. Heck with working hard. Just give it to me now. We see this trend right in our own country, right? Hard work and time and effort. People are losing patience with that kind of an approach. But it's the only kind that lasts. Well, so in Ethiopia, these people became so powerful, they put Haile Selassie in a dungeon where he died and began systematically to destroy what he had built up. I want you to look at these words here in quotes. They wanted to get rid of him. They didn't believe in his philosophy. They wanted power. And if you want power and somebody else has it, you get rid of them. I want you to look at these words. Hoarding. What does that sound like to you? Hoarding.
Sounds like a bad word.
That sounds like a bad word. Do you hoard things? What does that mean?
Yes. Keep it for yourself.
Yeah, do you know that there are people today who accuse other people who store food for perhaps a rainy day down the line as hoarding? And they say, oh, there ought to be a law against hoarding. That's made to sound bad. Have you heard that? Uh-huh. Yeah. That's what they were doing there. Capital accumulation. Oh, that's a bad word, isn't it? Capital accumulation. That old money bags, he's just making money off the rest of it. And he's just got this nice big bank account. And don't you want to share in some of the share equally in the profits? You see how this word capital accumulation can begin to be made negative? But what do you know about capital accumulation?
It's a good sign.
You got to have it in order to have industry, in order to have some money to build a factory with to provide jobs. Look at the next one. Big farms. You got these huge farms that have tractors and modern equipment, but you have some people out there that own no land. So you go to these people and you say, wouldn't you like some land? Look at these people that have all these big farms. Don't you want a little bit of land? Can you get people on your side with that argument? Oh yeah. Well, you support me in power, and you know what we're going to do with the land? We're going to take it all and we're going to redistribute it so everybody has 2 acres. You think you could get votes for that and support for that? Oh yeah? What happens when each person only has 2 acres?
They might not be able, they can't support themselves.
Can you buy a tractor on the produce, on the income of 2 acres? No. All of a sudden, technology ceases. All of a sudden, people are out working on their 2 acres with hoes and shovels, just like mankind had done for 5,000 years. And the whole economy begins to shut down. All of a sudden, you're not the breadbasket anymore, and food distribution and production begins to cease, and people begin to live as they always have done, hand-to-mouth existence. You see that? All under these false philosophies of redistributing the land. Look at the next one. Exploitation. What does that sound like? That sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? These wealthy people are exploiting you, the workers. And everybody has equal rights, and so everybody should have equal things. Wouldn't you like an equal amount of land and prosperity along with the wealthy money bags? Wouldn't you like that? Oh, yes, yes. Well, then you support us. And these people start taking power. They get rid of Haile Selassie. And the whole thing turns not only socialist, but the worst kind of socialism, communism. That is a perfect example. And so what happened? What happened? Government control forced the redistribution of everything, so as the French philosopher Rousseau always taught, everybody should have everything equally. And when that is taught and exercised, what level does everybody wind up on? Misery. You know, we're all equally miserable. Okay? So you had this great land reform, and which, as I said, brings on scarcity and eventual famine. Do you remember the famine in Ethiopia? It's still happening, actually. Still haven't solved the problem back to where they were.
The states decided that they ought to provide.
And do you remember there were a lot of churches and a lot of charity groups over here that were sending foodstuffs to the starving people of Ethiopia? You saw it on the television. People were starving, children as well as adults, just their bones almost showing through their skin. What tragedy. And so you have to ask yourself, what caused this?
Being greedy.
Was it a lack of resources?
No.
No. They had already proven that they could do better. What was it?
Socialism.
Excessive government control. In other words, a lack of freedom. I'm telling you, young people, as I hope I've pointed out to you in this class, it's usually not a lack of resources where people have problems. It's mostly an excess of government control. That would solve a whole lot of problems. Just set the people free and watch it happen. Amazing. Of course, to set people free, you have to educate and do the things that we know you have to do. This also is a good example of what the founders said when they said, you must have a large republic. Because you're going to get factions, and you're going to get rebellion, and you're going to get some riots once in a while in an area or two. But if you have a large enough republic with fixed laws in place, what will happen? You'll be able to absorb that unrest over there. And you'll be able to absorb this problem over here. Economically, militarily, and you'll be able to go on. So we need a large republic, which of course the United States is. Well, let's talk about now some things under the heading, the Western Hemisphere is the hope of the world. And we've gone over these things, but just as a reminder to bring all of this together. What is the doctrine that said, you stay in your hemisphere and you leave us alone and we'll stay in our hemisphere? the Monroe Doctrine. What a great blessing to America. Have we violated the Monroe Doctrine?
Yes.
Terribly. And what did we say about making deals with foreign countries?
Not to.
Particularly in other hemispheres. Don't do it. Don't make political deals with other countries. They'll always have their squabbles. And if you do, you're going to draw yourself right into their squabbles. Who said that? George Washington in his farewell address, the man whom we celebrate today, having died 200 years ago today. You talk about wisdom. See, he knew it. The founders knew this wisdom. Wisdom that we've forgotten, right? Does that mean we have to be isolationists? And not even talk to anybody? Not be friends with anybody? No. We want to be friends with everyone. But politically, you stay separate. What did George Washington and all the founders say was absolutely necessary to be for the people to have in order to have freedom? Religion and morality. Again, George Washington in his farewell address, he said, these two things are the pillars that support our society. What happens when you knock out a pillar? The whole thing will collapse. Washington called it, these are the pillars that hold up our society. You can see what's happening. He also said, don't take favorites. You remember this concept, don't you? This whole business of calling somebody favored or most favored automatically creates what?
Less favored.
Yeah, enemies. And Washington in his farewell address said, don't do that. Be friends to everybody, right? And then the United States was to be the world peacemaker. Is it possible to develop a military system of defense that would fall under being a world peacemaker? Yes. President Reagan announced it. It was underway a little bit until it was basically ignored and later completely rebuffed by succeeding presidents. Strategic Defense Initiative, where the whole world would be free from this ugly threat of nuclear attack. See, that's being a peacemaker, isn't it? Okay? Well, I want you to turn now as we read just a couple of paragraphs in closing on page 774. In order for this thing to happen the way the founders wanted it to happen, Americans, and when we say Americans, who are we talking about?
Us.
You and me, right? Not just people out there, but you and I have to have moral willpower to succeed. Do you have moral willpower? Read with me, or follow along as I read, from J. Reuben Clark, a former Undersecretary of State and ambassador to Mexico, who really explained it this way. You may remember this from our discussion of one of the 28 principles. He says, America, multi-raced and multi-nationed, is by tradition, by geography, by citizenry, by natural sympathy, and by material interest, the great neutral nation of the world. I hope you remember that phrase, the great neutral of the earth. I don't know, how does that sound to you? Does that sound peaceful? Does that sound friendly? The great neutral of the earth. He says, God so designed it. Drawn from all races, creeds, and nations. Our sympathies run to every oppressed people. Our feelings, engaged on opposite sides of great differences, will, in their natural course, if held in due and proper restraint, neutralize the one with the other. What is he saying here? We can be friends with whom? What's he saying?
Everybody.
People that are engaged on opposite sides. We can be friends with everyone. And by being friends with everyone, we will help to neutralize the antagonism between the two. Isn't that wonderful? Is that not a peacemaker? Directed in right channels, this great body of feeling for the one side or the other will ripen into sympathy and love for all misguided and misled fellow men who suffer in any cause, and this sympathy and love will run out to all humanity in its woe. I hope you catch the vision of that. I hope you're like this in your families. Are you a peacemaker in your family? See, we can talk about being a world peacemaker, but you can't be a world peacemaker until you're what? Until you're what? You can't clean up the world until you can clean up your bedroom. You can't go out and solve the world's problems the way they should be solved and be a peacemaker unless you're a peacemaker at home. Isn't that a great place to try this? That's the best place to try it, being a peacemaker. Next time there's a little squabble or contention in your home, I don't know, I assume there is once in a while, right?
Yeah.
Next time that happens, don't take sides. Be a peacemaker to both sides. You try that. A whole new opportunity will open to you. And you'll see what the founders, what J. Reuben Clark is talking about here. Okay? Try that. He says, look at the bottom now. If we shall rebuild our lost moral power and influence by measures such as these, which will demonstrate our love for humanity, our justice, our fair-mindedness, we shall then be where we can offer mediation between the two belligerents. He gave this speech as a warning not to get into World War II. He says, America, the great neutral, will thus become the peacemaker of the world, which is her manifest destiny if she lives the law of peace. What is the law of peace? What is the law of peace? Huh? All right? Yeah, but first, before I put that up, the law of peace is exactly what we've been talking about. No contention. You see problems, don't get involved in it. As an individual, as a family, as a community, as a nation. See, the same principles apply here, don't they? What is the law of peace? The Constitution is a law of peace. And if we followed it, we would be free from these entanglements which has drawn us into war. So, young people, I'll leave you with this. Our challenge is education, first of all. We have to learn the law, right? We have to learn the law of peace, which we have done in this class. And after you learn the law of peace, then you have to what? Go out and do it. And I know you can't go to Washington today, but you can go where? You can go to your home and to your family. And you can start right here and right now practicing the law of peace. Will you do that? And I think if you do that, the founders then will be so proud of you. And with the help of the good Lord, the example that you have learned in your homes will spread and spread, and one day we're going to save this nation by restoring the Constitution. Thank you very much.